Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for accepting to come to this interview and being so willing to share your journey as a supervisor.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm delighted to be participating in this.
Mm. Helen, if we could start with a little bit of a background to yourself as a coach and what brought you to coaching and a little bit of your coaching background, that would be really good.
Yes, and okay, so my early career was in retail management, and as part of that, I moved into a learning and development role and became qualified as a learning and development practitioner and manager. And I worked for a number of years in the corporate world in that role. But around about 20, 25 years ago, I moved into freelance practice as a learning and development consultant. And for a number of years, I was working with different clients, mostly in leadership and talent development, communication skills programs. And one client asked me one day, after I'd been running my practice for about 8 years, do you coach people, Helen, on a one-to-one basis? Because they were quite keen to add one-to-one coaching to a talent development program that I was leading on. And in my naivety at the time, I went, well, I think I could probably do that. And so I began to coach. And I was getting great feedback about it. But after a year or two, I began to recognize that potentially I wasn't trained to be a coach, and it was important that I complete some training, which I did with some ILM qualifications to start with. And as my practice grew and developed, I also noticed that the other clients were very interested in having the option to use me for coaching as well as facilitative work. And so I decided I would like to add a professional standard to my coaching, and I became an accredited coach practitioner with the EMCC just about 8 or 9 years ago now. And from there, I developed coaching into a core part of my practice. And these days I probably do a lot more one-to-one coaching than I do facilitative or training work. So about 5, 6 years ago, I also began to volunteer for the EMCC as a assessor in applications for accreditation, looking at coaching standards and how they practiced as a coach and how they turned up as unique coaches for the clients. And I've been doing quite a bit of that mentoring work, really, supporting applicants to gain their accreditation. And one day, one of them said, "You do great work as a supervisor, Helen." And I went, "Oh, I hadn't really thought of that." And then I thought about the fact that I had so much support from my supervision as a supervisee in all over those years that I'd been coaching, that I began to think I ought to consider becoming as a supervisor. But unlike my pathway as a coach, I thought I should start by getting a qualification first this time, rather than the other way around. And so as a result, I began to explore what potential providers were going to be helpful, and I chose ICCS as my provider. And the rest is history, really, in terms of gaining that qualification about 2 years ago.
Mm. Lovely. Thank you for sharing. And you preempted, my question around what brought you to supervision, which
Mm.
is really great. Like you can really see a journey that you went through as a coach and then as a supervisor. And Helen, in terms of the training itself.
Mm.
Actually, let's go first to what do you love now that you trained as a coach, supervisor? What do you love about being a supervisor?
Um, there are a lot of things that I really enjoy about being a supervisor, and it's still something that sorry, let me think about how I answer this one. So I'd spread my practice across coaching, supervision, and still some group facilitation and learning. But the particular qualities of supervision, it's very much around a space where I feel like I'm still learning all the time with every contact I have with a supervisee. It's fascinating working with individuals who may have had similar development to myself as coaches, but who manifest the way they coach in their own very unique ways, and also charting their journey and learning so much about the different pathways they've taken and how they're applying their learning, which is very much the subject of as coaching and supervision conversations, has informed me as much as I've been able to support them. So it's the part of the work that I do where I feel I learn the most about how to be a great coach, but also helping others with the challenges they meet when they are coaching, partly through sharing my own experiences, but also through using some really well-trodden paths of questioning approaches and frameworks to enable people to really get an understanding of, so what does good coaching look like anyway? What sort of standards should we have? So it's my happy place, I guess, where everything that we cover is completely interesting to me. And we can't say that about all the work that we do, but certainly in the field of supervision, I can't think of anything that doesn't interest me in it.
Yes. And Helen, in terms of the impact that supervision had on your coaching, could you give us a few examples, maybe, or ways in which supervision has impacted the work that you do as a coach?
Yes. There's two. Just to check, are we looking at the training I received to be a supervisor or my actual supervision of my coaching practice? Or a
Can
bit
be
of both?
both.
It can be both. Well, I'd say a big reason why I decided to become qualified as a supervisor was because of the quality of supervision I'd received that made me into a much better coach than I might have been without it. So examples that I can think of are I received both one-to-one and group supervision, and I found that it was a great place for me to uncover perhaps unconscious attitudes and perspectives I had that were influencing how I coached that I couldn't see for myself without being very gently asked some excellent questions by my supervisor and by my co-supervisees in group context. I think that both of those spaces, if they're managed really well, be it one-to-one supervision or group, are places where one has a lovely mirror reflected back to them in the questions that are asked by people who genuinely have a great understanding of what it's like to be a coach, because they themselves are also coaches or have been in the past if they're supervisors. And I can't think of anywhere else where I've had such insightful questions asked of me that have enabled me to shift my understanding of a reflection on a coaching session that didn't go so well, for example, or have reminded me about some of the ethics that are so important in the relationships that we set up with our clients. And so time and time again, I think the most impactful ones for me have been triggering unconscious drivers that I wasn't aware of and bringing them out so that I could actually look at them, respond to them, and understand them so that I could manage them better as I go forward. The other thing that I've really benefited from as a supervisee has been really feeling restored because of the complete acceptance and understanding of me, warts and all, the
Mm.
things that go well, don't go so well. And never feeling criticized for that, just feeling, yes, we get it. Everyone has their bad days, their good days. And let's look at how we can make sure those good days are more common than the days that aren't so good. So that restorative element is so important to
Mm.
me anyway.
Yeah, I find that the more experienced the coach is, the more the restorative element comes up in our supervision sessions.
Yes. There's a complexity that as we mature as coaches,
Mm.
that perhaps it was always there throughout our entire coaching practice. But I sometimes look back and think in my early days as a coach, there were possibly dynamics that I completely missed, um, or support I could have offered if I had considered and thought about the right question to help people shift or the right insight to share with them. Um, the downside of becoming so much more aware of what we can do to support others, either as coaches or supervisors, is that it also gives us a much wider range of options and choices about what we do next. And I personally can find that challenging sometimes. And even as I say that, I realize that probably means I'm worrying too much about it. I should let the universe decide, because usually the system works it out for themselves.
Mm.
Um, I'm really inspired by group supervision because I sit back and know sometimes that the power of the group to unfold and uncover issues for the individual who has presented a case. And I often feel as a group supervisor, I'm simply chaperoning an experience, and following or sharing a process. And actually, the real energy comes from all of the co-supervisees. It's that's just the sense of achievement. Is that the right word? No, it's sort of sense of collective positivity that comes out of that. Each time we work in a group supervision experience, it is, for me, is a really powerful thing that resonates and stays with me long after the sessions are over. And it brings a great sense of calmness and completeness that I find I don't think I could ever think of a time in my work other than potentially, an incredibly well-run group experience as a facilitator, where you realize that as people are leaving the experience, they've all got what they individually wanted from it. So, yeah, yeah, actually, that's something new I hadn't compared before. Um,
Mm.
but I hope I'm not going on too much about that. You can see I really do enjoy supervision a lot.
It's great. It's great, Helen. What you're sharing really gives us a glimpse of what it means to be a supervisor, to work as a supervisor, and what you personally enjoy in it.
Mm.
And I'm sure it will resonate with some others as well who really enjoy that group work, and they have the question, what does group work mean in supervision, and what can it give
Mm.
you in terms of for you as a supervisor and for the participants as well. So it's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. If we go back to the times when you were training as a supervisor,
Yes.
ICCS, what would you say were some of the either surprising moments, maybe things that you learned that you didn't expect to learn about yourself or about others or about the work as a supervisor? Or if you can think of something along those lines, maybe something that was challenging that you didn't find quite as easy or straightforward to do, or
Well,
both.
actually, yes. One very significant experience comes to mind, which actually probably combines a bit of both of the things that you've just mentioned there. Both a really insightful learning piece that shifted my whole approach, not just to supervision, but to coaching, but also felt challenging at the time. And
Mm,
I felt very uncomfortable. Um, and what it related to was that, as you know, within the ICCS supervision package, there are opportunities for reflective practice in smaller groups. And one of the passions I held dear as a coach was that coaching was all about being non-directive. Our goal as this is a belief of mine, that our goal as coaches, as much as possible, is to be pure around questioning and not perhaps mentoring too much or not imposing our views on our clients. And um, in the reflective practice group, our facilitator asked the question about um, the Heron model and the more direct interventions that relate to informing or
yeah.
guiding. And I remember I probably unwisely at the time expressed the perspective that, but as coaches, we're very good at finding questions that achieve the same thing. And the facilitator sensed there was something going on underneath that I wasn't even aware of. And so she put me in a position where she insisted that I be directive with the person presenting the case. And I felt really uncomfortable. And I said, but this is not normally how I would do it. But she sort of stood her ground, made a point. And actually, I came up with a really, as I reflect, probably a very eloquent but gentle way of offering advice, which, as we know, is at times required as a supervisor. Um, And I remember at the time thinking, why am I so against using this approach in the supervision context? And it troubled me greatly because although I handled it well and dealt with it well, it left me feeling very uncomfortable afterwards. And it dawned on me that one of the reasons I'd chosen to become a coach was that I'm not very good at taking instruction from others. And therefore, I was perhaps shaping a career for myself as a coach that meant that everything was about it, finding a great way to ask a question rather than tell someone what to do. Now, I know it may seem like a fine distinction, but I've always felt so much more comfortable in the place where I'm not ordering people or telling. And the insight I gained was that this was actually all about me and my resistance to authority. And I was probably parallel processing in many contexts, not just in coaching, around here's how I want the world to treat me if I treat the world this way. And it was a really interesting and quite uncomfortable insight, but one that it suddenly became really clear to me I would need to deal with if I was going to be a good supervisor and to become much more comfortable with that. Even now, 2.5 years later, that moment and that learning that I gained in that reflective practice groups is still with me. And I have to, I'm much more self-aware now of some of the true drivers that operate inside me at moments when I am doing my best to be facilitative on the one hand, but yearning to just tell them how it is and get on with it on the other, which I wouldn't do in supervision. But I know in other parts of my life, I'm sometimes far too diplomatic and then disappointed when people are not diplomatic with me. So uh, yeah, complete life-changing piece. And very glad that I learned it because I think I might have struggled to be the best supervisor I can be if I hadn't.
Helen, thank you so much for bringing this very tangible example. In terms of tangible, I mean making it really easy and tangible for somebody who's listening who hasn't trained yet as a supervisor on what could the training do for somebody. And different people have different learnings, but this very specific example makes it so easy to either relate or to understand in what ways could this supervision journey or training change somebody or help somebody as a coach or as a person even.
Well, the program generally is such a lovely medley of investigations from module to module into both group and one-to-one supervision, but also a wide range of psychological models that give the supervisor great context for understanding coaches who operate in a field that perhaps they're less familiar with, or use a coaching approach or style that they themselves have not used as a coach in the past. And one in particular was psychodynamic coaching, a module on that, which I also find incredibly interesting because it was an area of learning I was less involved with prior to that, but I've done quite a bit of work on it since. And I think that was the other thing about learning, training to be a supervisor, is it sparks our interest and curiosity in a whole range of fields of thinking and psychology and behavior that enable us to bring some great resources to our supervisees and to our coaching clients. That's the double benefit I think I've gained is my coaching practice is so much more effective because of the supervision training. And in addition, I now have this new element to my career that I really enjoy working
Mm. Who do you supervise, Helen?
on. I have about 5 one-to-one supervisees, some who are very recently qualified as coaches, some who are highly experienced. And I run 2 group supervision sessions on a regular basis. One of those 2 I run with a fellow trainee from the ICCS program. So we co-supervise for an organization. And those are, both of those group practices have been running for, since not long after we qualified. And I find those highly enriching. And one is an internal coach organization. And so that's a great insight for someone who's been a freelance practitioner for many years, getting a sense of understanding some of the challenges and parameters internal coaches face. And the other one is a network of coaches who work in many different fields. And that's an endlessly fascinating place as well.
And what kind of challenges do your clients tend to bring? If you could give us a few examples, would be great.
Yes, a lot of the cases presented by coaches relate to conflicts of interest, contracting, questions about ethics and concerns they might have. So that's one area. With the conflict of interest, for a lot of people, there's if they are an external practicing inside an organization, their challenges can be with being asked to disclose confidential information from coaching sessions and working out how best to navigate that given the contracts of confidentiality that they have with their clients. But also there's a lot of challenges that people present around recognizing that a session didn't go as it was planned, but not fully understanding what it was that may have got in the way of the successful session. And I refer frequently to the seven-eyed model of supervision. It's a really good resource for helping in both group supervision and one-to-one, helping the presenter really reflect on what was it about this session that I felt wasn't working well, and looking at it from lots of different perspectives. Often the outcome is that actually the coach themselves have operated with to the best of their capability in the situation, and that actually what was happening might have been connected to a response from the client or wider systemic issues that they had less control over. But in that case, it's still really useful for them to have that insight and to tell themselves that actually everything that they could do, they did do well, and to help them feel reassured about that and more mindful of that in future situations. Sometimes, though, this is a really useful piece of learning for them and for the rest of us if we're working as a group, because often we recognize similarities between examples that others share that actually resonate with our own experience.
And in terms of the future, what does the future hold for you as a coach supervisor?
That's a really good question. Well, I'm probably going to be retiring very soon, as I'm well into my 60s now. But I'm not completely convinced that I'll stop totally all of the work that I do. And for supervision, that's the area that I would really like to continue working in, both as a one-to-one and a group supervisor. And so in order to continue supporting that practice, I really want to get a more in-depth understanding of some of the most important topics that resonate for as themes. And this probably expands on your previous question. There's certainly a really important theme around supporting different cultures and handling and supporting coaches with neurodiverse needs of both their clients and they themselves, as they might identify that they themselves are working with a neurodiverse condition. And the field of neuroscience and behavior, that as knowledge becomes more and more available to us of how our minds and brains work, that really informs the choices that we have as coaches and supervisors about the interventions and that we can make that support the needs of our clients. And I'm really conscious that if I want to continue to be a supervisor, I need to continue learning myself and to make sure that I can meet people in as proper partnership and help them with the decisions or choices that they want to make as they go forward.
And if you were to give a thought, maybe even piece of advice to somebody who's an experienced coach and they are considering training as supervisors, what would that be?
There's quite a lot of different thoughts, but the one I think that jumps out most importantly is that sense of enabling others to develop and have the journey of self-fulfillment that they themselves have had as a coach. I'm probably maybe I'm making a big assumption here, but if someone has a serious interest in supervision, that's often because they already have a very fulfilling coaching practice, and that may well be connected to their own skill sets as a coach, which are probably more significant than maybe they themselves realize. And having an opportunity to put that knowledge to work, if that makes sense, in the way that that can be shared in partnerships with others in supervision, is uniquely satisfying. So if that's something they really enjoy about their coaching work, I predict they'll enjoy it just as much, if not more, as supervisors.
Mm.
So I'd say go for it.
Mm. Thank you so much, Helen. This was a really great and insightful interview, and thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you very much.